NYUp.com, I am Matt Parrino, and I'm joined today by Baltimore Ravens beat writer Aaron Kasinitz out of PennLive.com. Aaron, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, absolutely, Matthew. I'm excited to talk about some meaningful football.
Exactly. We've got a big game to start the season here. The Buffalo Bills are traveling to Baltimore to take on the Ravens, and tons of storylines in this one. I mean, on the Baltimore side, you have a revamped offense, same quarterback in Joe Flacco, but some new pieces for him. On the Buffalo Bills side of things, a new quarterback. He played a little bit last season in some mop-up duty and spot starts. Nathan Peterman has gotten the call over rookie Josh Allen. But I want to start, having you here talking about the Ravens offense. Joe Flacco still there, but they've brought in Michael Crabtree, Willie Snead, John Brown, a couple new weapons. What's the feeling around the team right now in terms of this offense?
Yeah, there's a lot of optimism. I think the first part of it, as you mentioned, is those new wide receivers. So last year, Jeremy Maclin really struggled. Michael Campanaro couldn't stay healthy with the Ravens. This year, they've got three wide receivers who've all been really successful in the league, and two of them, John Brown and Willie Snead, are still right in their primes. So the thought is that I still don't think they have a Pro Bowl caliber guy. I think Michael Crabtree has been in the league 10 years, but the point is they've got three receivers who've done it in the NFL before, three receivers who should be capable options for Joe Flacco, which they didn't have last year. And it really limits an offense if you don't have guys who can create separation and get open. The Ravens last year had to be kind of gimmicky. They had to run some screens and get tight ends involved, which you want to do regardless, but that was all they could do because they couldn't trust the wide receivers, Michael Campanaro. Mike Wallace had a decent year, but they couldn't trust most of their wide receivers to get open. The thought is this year they've got some guys who can get open, particularly John Brown, who can stretch the field deep, and that should entirely change the offense. And then the second aspect of all of this is Joe Flacco is healthy. 2 years ago, he was recovering from an ACL injury, so he didn't have a full training camp. Last year, if you remember, he missed the entire preseason, entire training camp with a back injury, didn't even suit up for practice until early September. This year, Joe Flacco's had a full training camp. So the hope, at least, it's easy to be optimistic in the summer, but the hope is you got Joe Flacco healthy, you got him new weapons. This isn't going to be a top 10 offense, but at least it can be respectable. It can be an offense that can move the ball down the field.
Obviously, a bit of a coup for the Baltimore Ravens and Alex Collins really breaking out last year in the run game. On the Bills side of things, it's been interesting. It's been a rough preseason for the defense. Big storyline going into the year was the lack of a pass rush. They're hoping former first-round draft pick Shaq Lawson can kind of emerge. Trent Murphy, who they brought in as a free agent from the Washington Redskins, hasn't really been healthy. He's been dealing with a groin injury, so if he can run out there, it'll be interesting to see. But the strong suit of this Buffalo Bills defense is that secondary. You have one of the best safety combos in the league in Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, and then one of the most most talented young cornerbacks in the game in Tre'Davious White. So how do you see, with the Baltimore Ravens coming in here with this whole new group, how do you see them, getting together, the cohesion against the defense that is pretty much, in part for the most part from last season?
Yeah, I think the Ravens worked very hard this summer on creating that cohesion. So at training camp, while the rest of the team would be starting their practice, especially early in training camp, Flacco and those three new receivers we talked about, Crabtree, Brown, and Snead, would just be running routes on air down the field. They really put effort into creating some chemistry, into getting the feel of each other and kind of gelling. Mm-hmm. Will that work out again against a talented secondary and a secondary that's played together a little bit like the Buffalo Bills? It's going to be tough to see, and the Ravens will be likely missing their rookie tight end Hayden Hurst, who would have started had he been healthy. He had foot surgery, so it's going to be tough for the Ravens, I think, at first. The Ravens' weakness, I would say, at least in terms of their roster, as a lot of teams in the NFL, is that offensive line that they have. So we kind of see a situation where the Ravens might hope that their offensive line holds up against the Buffalo Bills pass rush that isn't that scary, and that'll give Flacco some time. But I think you're right. I think that's going to be the key to the game is, can Flacco get into a groove against a pretty good secondary? And, I mean, your guess is as good as mine. I think you've got a lot of talent on the Ravens offense, but they haven't done it in a regular season game yet, and the Bills have. The Bills had a pretty good year last year defending the pass, and I think that's going to be a key, and I'm excited to see how that shakes out.
Mm-hmm. And, for the Bills, in the preseason game 3, struggled quite a bit against Andy Dalton. He threw 200 yards, 2 touchdowns. So some of those problems, batting coverage. Vonta Davis is kind of coming over after the injury, not quite looking like the Vonta Davis of old. And then, like you said, no pass rush. So, you look at this game, and that's going to be a key to the game, right? The Bills struggled last year to stop the run. I think they ranked 24th or somewhere in the bottom part of the league in rush defense. And Alex Collins, a guy that you guys are going to be able. You have some offensive linemen coming back as well, right? That were out last season.
Yeah, so Marshall Yanda, 6-time Pro Bowler, is a right guard, and he'll be back. He missed all 13 of 16 games last year with ankle injury, and then he missed the start of training camp this year with after having shoulder surgery. So he didn't play at all in the preseason, but he should be back. Ronnie Stanley is solid left tackle. The issues come on the other side of the interior, so left guard and center and right tackle even are kind of 3 spots that have been up in the air. But with Yanda and Stanley, the Ravens' offensive line should be good, not great. And if there's a way to beat them, it would be right up the middle because center Matt Skura is a guy who's going to start, but he hasn't played center in the NFL before. He was a practice squad, undrafted guy, so he's still kind of unproven.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of unproven, you mean go to the Bills' offensive side of the football, and Nathan Peterman is going to be getting the start. He looked really good during the preseason. I mean, it's just preseason football, but he completed 81% of his passes. Had one game where he started against the Panthers, first team defense, and was his best game. I mean, he took the team down the field. Very quick, 9 for 9 completions in that stint before throwing a little interception before he went out. But a lot of new parts. The offensive line, 2 former Pro Bowlers have retired in Richie Incognito, Eric Wood. You have a wide receiver group that's thought to be one of the worst overall units in the league. But, a lot to prove here for a guy like Kelvin Benjamin, who's going to be this number 1. For the Bills in a contract year. So it's going to be interesting to see. LaShawn McCoy hasn't played much in the preseason. Once they sprinkle him back in, how that looks. But on the other side, for the Ravens, defensively it was interesting. I looked back at their team last year, and it seemed like when Jimmy Smith, who's going to miss this game against the Bills, went out in December, it seemed like that pass defense kind of struggled down the stretch. And, Bills fans are very familiar because it was the Cincinnati Bengals game which got them into the playoffs. So, that defense, that secondary, the pass rush, everything, give me a synopsis of where that stands going into this game.
Yeah, I think the Ravens' defense is the strength of the team. I think it has a chance to be a very good defense. Everybody knows about Terrell Suggs, but the Ravens have drafted a bunch of pass rushers the last couple of years, and they're all kind of starting to click this year. So I think it's going to be Suggs on one side, Matt Judon is the guy on the other side, then they're going to rotate in. So I think the Ravens should have a pretty good pass rush, but you're right. The big question mark is, can the secondary hold up without Jimmy Smith? The Ravens have the players to do it. I think part of the issue last year was when Jimmy Smith went out, Marlon Humphrey had to start, and he was a rookie. He had a decent rookie year. He showed signs of progress. But this year, he's a former first-round pick. This year in his second season, if he makes a big step forward, you might have your number 1 cornerback even without Jimmy Smith there. That's the Ravens' hope. Also, last year, Tavon Young missed the season with a torn ACL. He's their slot cornerback, and they really like him in that slot cornerback role. So the Ravens have the pieces to hold up, but yeah, you look at the stats, because Jimmy Smith has missed a lot of time, whether with injuries or now the suspension over the last couple of years. It's pretty stark. They're a lot better when he's on the field. The Ravens defense last year had 3 shutouts, which I think was the most for an NFL team since the 70s. It was really impressive, but then they only ranked 6th in points allowed. So there were some games where they gave up a lot of points. But you can look at 2 things. They struggled when their best defensive tackle, Brandon Williams, went out. He'll play nose tackle. He missed 4 games, and the defense really struggled last year. And then they really struggled the last 4 games when Jimmy Smith was sidelined with the Achilles injury. When they had their full complement of players, they were among the best defenses in the league. So the question is, do they have the depth now to absorb those blows? Can Marlon Humphrey be good enough that they don't feel the absence of Jimmy Smith? Can they just design coverages to defend a guy like Kelvin Benjamin? That's the question. I think the Ravens have the pieces to do it. If I were going to guess, I would say Sunday's game should be very low scoring. But they haven't, in the past, they haven't been great without Jimmy Smith, and they kind of have to get that monkey off their back and prove that they can be a good defense without their best quarterback.
You mentioned Terrell Suggs, and it's interesting. Guy going into his 16th season, had a very productive year for you guys, but for the Ravens. But you wonder, as these years go on, when is it going to kind of fall off? In Buffalo, LaShawn McCoy entering his 10th season as a running back in this league, where there's not a lot of the career span is not very long for running back. So I feel like it's kind of a similar situation. Is there concern at all amongst not only the Baltimore fan base, but the organization that you could see a big drop off from Terrell Suggs?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, the Ravens have been planning for this. In 2017, I wasn't covering the team then, but they drafted two edge rushers in the second and third round, Tim Williams and Tyus Bowser. Both of those guys have had really strong preseasons. And then on the other side, they have Matt Judon, who had 8 sacks last year and only his second season. He kind of seems like a guy who's breaking out. So I don't necessarily know if it's a concern so much as that the Ravens have been planning for Terrell Suggs to drop off, and he really hasn't.
Right.
So, he had 11.5 sacks last year, and you watch him running around the field, he looks like he's the best athlete out there. Mm-hmm. It's not just that he's in shape and he looks like he knows what he's doing. He looks like he's the fastest, biggest, strongest guy. Will that drop-off come? It might. Eventually it has to, right? He's in his mid-30s. He's going into his 16th year. But I think the Ravens are pretty comfortable with how they set things up. If the drop-off comes, and if it doesn't, now all of a sudden they have a really deep pass rushing group. So yeah, and I'd imagine that in Buffalo with LaShawn McCoy, it's a little easier to tell because he's getting 20, 30 touches a game. Mm-hmm. With Terrell Suggs, it's a little harder to tell because pass rushers can have a great game without getting a sack. So I think with the Ravens fans, I think they're pretty confident. It would have to be a pretty big stretch without Terrell Suggs making a play for them to start feeling nervous, because Terrell Suggs has been so good for so long. And like I said, the Ravens are pretty well stocked behind him to continue to have a good pass rush, even if he does take a little notch down.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, let's get to the game itself. Bills-Ravens. The Ravens opened as a 3-point favorite. It's been bet up to 7 points now. So bettors don't have a lot of faith in the Bills going on the road and getting a W here. But I thought, let's go back and forth here. Just talk about our 3 keys to the game. I'll start with you. We'll alternate. What's your top key to the game for the Ravens to be successful in this one?
Yeah, so my top key is probably pretty easy, but you got to stop the run. I think I looked back at the 2 games Nathan Peterman started last year for the Bills, and the one he threw the 5 interceptions, and then the second one I believe they beat the Colts 13-7, and LaShawn McCoy had like 35 carries. Mm-hmm. The Bills, I know McCoy's getting old and all that, but they love to ride McCoy, as you well know. And if the Ravens can stop the run, if they can get to McCoy, particularly on first down, if they can stop LaShawn McCoy from getting 4 or 5 yards on fourth down, they'll put the Bills in tough situations. They can let those pass rushers loose. They'll be in a good spot.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, the number one is like right in line with what you're talking about here. I think the Bills have to establish a running game right out of the gate, right? You got Nathan Peterman coming out. He's demonstrated in preseason that he's getting the ball out quick, finding his target and putting the ball in a place where they can make a play. But once that regular season pass rush starts getting going, I feel like he's going to need to lean on LaShawn McCoy, Chris Ivory, and even Marcus Murphy, who's emerged as a potential option in this new offense under Brian Daboll. It's not an easy feat because, like you said, Baltimore is predicted to be one of the best defenses in this league, especially against the run. But I think LaShawn McCoy should be healthy. He hasn't played much in the preseason, and I think they're going to have to lean on him. And I think we'll see very early on if this is the same LaShawn McCoy that's been tearing up the league the last few years.
Yeah, no, I think we're on the same page with that one. Mm-hmm. My second key for the Ravens will be they've got to force at least 1 turnover, hopefully more for Baltimore. They led the league in takeaways last year. I believe they had 34. They had at least 2 turnovers every preseason game. They're a team that really likes to attack the ball. Eric Weddle in the defensive backfield. Terrell Suggs is one of those guys who loves to come around the edge and get a strip sack. The Ravens defense is huge on forced turnovers. And I think the Bills, if they control the clock, you get the defense out of the game, that's how they're going to have a shot to win. But if the Ravens can force a turnover or 2, that'll just change the vibe. I think if the Ravens can get 2 turnovers, they'll be in really good shape.
Mm-hmm. I think that the Bills demonstrated last year on defense that they're able to, cause turnovers, especially with the secondary. So I'm going to go, on the other side and just, limit the turnovers. I mean, in these most of the games this season, I mean, the Bills are going to be underdog. I think there's a preview that just came out that I think they're only favored in 3 games this season. So you have to limit mistakes, especially a young quarterback like Nathan Peterman, who, you hate to harp on the 5 interception game, but that's
Right.
pretty much almost all we have to go off of. So you start making those mistakes and you're going to get yourself into trouble early. I think, like I said, it goes back to the first point, lean on that running game and hope that your defense can make enough plays against that, Baltimore offense who, may have come together already, but it's going to be their first regular season game. You hope that it takes them a few weeks to get comfortable with each other and, lean on that run game.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think again we're kind of on a similar page with all these keys. My third key for the Ravens is going to be you have to protect Joe Flacco very well. Talking about the Bills' pass rush isn't necessarily great, so the Ravens need to take advantage of that. I think they'll be fine establishing the run. I think a lot of Ravens fans have confidence in Alex Collins. But I think they want to make a couple plays downfield. That's how you can push the game out of reach. That's how you can, and that's what the Ravens offseason was all about. Last year they ranked last in the NFL in yards per pass attempt. This year they want to get to the middle of the pack, maybe better. And I think to do that, they've got the receivers now. They've got a running game. You just got to give Flacco time. There's still some pieces back from the offensive line last year. Ronnie Stanley, Marshall Yanda. There's a few new offensive linemen. If you protect Joe Flacco, then we'll really get to see what these new receivers are about. If you don't protect Joe Flacco, it's going to be a long day because the Bills, like you said, they can force turnovers. They have a good secondary. You got to keep Joe Flacco upright. You got to give him a couple seconds to lift downfield and make a play.
Mm-hmm. I think, my third point was going to be, establishing, the pass rush against Joe Flacco on this offense. But I'm almost going to kind of change it up on the fly here and just talk about Tremayne Edmonds. I feel like this is going to be his first big, national stage. Like, everybody's going to be watching how this kid is able to come out here and run this defense. And he's had his moments in preseason where he's looked the part, but you always got to remind yourself, he's 20 years old. He's still learning all of the different nuances of being a middle linebacker in the NFL. He's got Lorenzo Alexander out there that's been helping him a lot. Helps him make some calls and stuff like that. But once we get into this regular season, everything's going to get quicker, and he's shown that he has the ability. But I think, especially against the run where the Bills struggled last year, they brought in Star Latulele. Still have Kyle Williams, who I'm not sure about his status coming off of that injury, but rookie Harrison Phillips will be in the middle as well. Those guys got to open up some holes so that Tremayne Edmonds can flash some of this athleticism, get in the backfield, break up some runs, and he showed that at times, especially in the Cincinnati Bengals game, where I feel like it's all starting to come together. And if he's strong at that second level, I think that's going to help the Bills out a great deal.
Yeah, I'm really excited to watch him. Obviously, going through the draft process, there was a lot of talk about him, and he seems like a guy who can change the dynamic of a defense. So it'll be fun to see how he fares in his debut.
Mm-hmm. And before we get out of here, I want to ask you quickly, just because, like I told you before we started it, this is my first year on the beat. So, I've obviously, been an NFL fan for as long as I can remember, keeping up with certain things. And one guy that's always kind of stood out to me that I thought was an interesting, case study in terms of a quarterback is Joe Flacco, a guy that, put the world on fire for, a playoff run all the way to that Super Bowl. But I feel like, before that, for the most part, and after that, he's been pretty mediocre. Is there a sense, I know you guys drafted, or the Ravens drafted Lamar Jackson. What's the temperature out there in terms of Flacco and, where this team and this fan base wants to go with that position?
Yeah, no, it's very interesting. I covered the Eagles before this year, so I've started on the Ravens this training camp. It's been interesting coming into the situation because there's no question Joe Flacco is and should be the starter for this season. If the Ravens want to have a chance to make the playoffs, and they haven't made it the past 3 years, so they need to keep Flacco's job, to keep John Harbaugh's job. He's the best quarterback, but you don't draft a guy in the first round if you're totally content with your quarterback. It's not like they picked up a mid-round guy like the Steelers have been doing these last couple of years. They went out and they traded up into the first round to get Lamar Jackson. The sense that I get is that most fans understand that it's going to be a process. Lamar Jackson obviously was, he came out of an entirely different system in Louisville. It really doesn't mirror that much of an NFL system at all. Lamar Jackson is only 21 years old. When I was covering the Eagles, Carson Wentz's first year, he was 23 years old. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Lamar Jackson's a little younger. The The Ravens got him in the first round, so they have that 5th-year option on him. I think the Ravens plan this to be a 2 or 3 year process. If Joe Flacco plays well this year, he can stay next year, and Lamar Jackson get another year to develop. But it's all really on. It's a unique situation because it's all really on Joe Flacco. If he plays well, it's going to be his team for a little while, at least a couple years. If he struggles, the Ravens season will probably, get headed in the wrong direction. Then we'll see Lamar Jackson. So really interesting. And I think fans understand this. I think fans understand it's an interesting case where Flacco still deserves a shot to kind of mention this is the first time he's been healthy in a couple years. He deserves a chance to have a good year, but no longer is he comfortable if he doesn't have a good year because the team's ready with Lamar Jackson if it needs to be.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It's very different situations, but in Buffalo, it's the same kind of thing. They drafted Josh Allen, a guy that the entire fan base is ready to, throw their arms around and embrace. And, he had a pretty strong camp minus that, pretty bad outing against the Bengals. But, a lot of things were going wrong there. The offensive line didn't play very well. But in Nathan Peterman, it's gonna be, very interesting to see how long the leash is and how long they wait out here in a very tough schedule, 5 of 7 to start the season on the road. How long do they wait if he starts to struggle, and if he starts to struggle bad, if he's throwing, multiple interceptions per game? When do they figure out that or realize that maybe it's time to go to the rookie? Very interesting to see. We will see, and we will see all of this go down. Everything we've talked about this Sunday. We have NFL football finally here. Let them know where they can find you for all your coverage.
Yeah, so PennLive.com/Baltimore-Ravens, where you can read our stuff. We got a Facebook page. On Twitter, I'm at Aaron Kaz Reports, AARONKAZ Reports. Follow along. It should be a lot of fun. I'm excited for the game.
Definitely. I look forward to meeting you out in Baltimore. And for all of your Buffalo Bills coverage, keep it locked on to NYUp.com and Syracuse.com.